long periods of loneliness and isolation. I had no friends, the tears streaming to my face and eating lunch alone. I was a weirdo because I was homeschooled. Straight up, welcome friends to my channel. I am fresh from trying to take a thumbnail for this video. If anyone can read this language, drop me a comment and let me know that some of my fellow speakers are watching me. And today's topic is actually me being homeschooled. So whenever I tell people that I've been homeschooled, I see that their eyes glaze over and they start imagining and envisioning themselves going through this wondrous experience of being homeschooled, and I get a lot of comments like, "You're so lucky," and "I wish that was the case with me." And I've gotten so many people curious and asking me about this experience that I've had for several years in middle school that I realized probably it'll be cool to make a video on this. I stand in a very unique position because I was homeschooled and then I re-entered the standard schooling system, so I can give you a perspective from both sides. And yes, I got to sleep in a lot, but there's way more nuance to being homeschooled and there's pros and cons in everything, and I'm here to reveal the dark underbelly of being homeschooled. Alright, let me talk a little bit about the structure. So generally people envision it this way: study only 10 minutes a day, party every day, sleep as long as you want, abundance of snacks. Now, before I get any further comments or questions on this, let me clarify, yes, there was abundance of snacks. And yes, I got to sleep in and get my fair share of beauty sleep. However, in terms of structure, while there was quite a bit of flexibility, my mom did have a routine in place. And even though we didn't have any specific strict rules on how far we're going to cover a certain subject, like if it was difficult for me, she would spend a bit more time on this and go more in depth, or if it was going well, we would go faster in certain areas. So I was very lucky to be blessed with an extremely intelligent mom. Thank you, Mama, for spending the time and teaching me all these things. But the schedule also depended on her own life because she's her own person. Even though she stayed at home to look after the kids and build a home for us, she also had her own things to do. Now, this is probably one of the best parts of being homeschooled because getting ready and getting yourself to school really sucked whenever you entered high school. I just remember this hostile cold air in the mornings, ripping myself away from the soft warm blankie, and then just going to the barely warming up bus because I was one of the first stations that the bus stopped at, and just trudging through snow and then just being in the bus, leaning against the windowsill and just imagining myself as the main character, but truly just wishing I was back in my warm bed. Now, a really big topic to discuss is actually relationships, and I wanted to focus on two aspects of that: relationships at home and relationships externally. The number two most common comment I get is that I wish I was homeschooled because I was bullied mercilessly. And I really do understand that pain because in primary school I was bullied for being an overweight kid. I remember sitting in the gym at the bench and not even understanding that I was feeling so upset. I just felt like the tears streaming to my face and I couldn't process the emotion. I just felt it so raw because this girl was just being really cruel spontaneously out of nowhere, calling me names. And unfortunately, that's not even scratching the surface of how bad the bullying stories can get, as we know, for a lot of people. So yes, in a way, being homeschooled inoculates you against the bad, but just like an antibiotic that kills off the bad bacteria, it kills off some of the good ones too. When I entered high school, I distinctly remember thinking, my God, why is it so hard to talk to people my age? Why is it so hard to get along with these people? I just couldn't fathom what I was doing wrong. And at the same time, I also really realized, wow, I really noticed that it was so easy for me to get along with teachers, with adults, with my family's friends. One of the things I notice people comment a lot under homeschooling videos is that whenever I meet somebody who's homeschooled, they're so well-mannered and polite, and that's how I usually can tell when somebody's been homeschooled. And I think a big part of that is that spending so much time with adults and at home and just seeing the the main primary social examples of people interacting as adults, you do pick up on these formal, well-mannered ways of interacting. There are a few other reasons probably that I'll get on a bit later when I'll be talking about learning and self-development as a homeschooler, but I think one of the main reasons is that, and possibly I just knew exactly how to speak and how to present myself and what words to use when talking with somebody older. And when I tried the same methodology, which was the only methodology I knew, with my peers, I ended up eating lunch alone. R.I.P. So at first I was naturally a very outgoing kid, extroverted, very talkative. It was very easy for me to make friends in any environment when I was a kid in primary school. And then right after that period of being homeschooled and re-entering high school, I just remember being in the classroom surrounded by these kids, these people, being in environments for hours upon hours a day where there's a lot of people, and just feeling overwhelmed. And one of the first times I spoke in class, I just felt this feeling, this heaviness, this anxiety right here, and then splattering inside and just making its way all the way up here, and the blood just rushing to my face and getting really, really warm. This anxiety and the social overwhelm is almost completely gone now from my life because I worked on that consciously. But being homeschooled really does take away from your social skills. And yes, I did have extracurricular activities, but compare having just 1 or 2 hours a day with doing some activity with your peers versus 5 to 8 hours a day where there's also a lot of downtime, a lot of chilling, a lot of fun exchanges rather than concentrated work on an activity. The rest of the hours is spent with family. And now I'm not going to go on record here and say I was a weirdo because I was homeschooled, or I had no social skills because of homeschooling, or I had no friends. But at some point, it's difficult to maintain certain friendships when you don't hang out on a consistent basis, and I didn't have any close friendships by the end of my homeschooling era. And that was one of the reasons also I got my dog, because my family just felt like I was super lonely. And I know it's different for everybody and it's a different story for different homeschoolers, but this was part of my journey. When I was trying to look more into the overall homeschooling experience, I came across this podcast of this wonderful lady. Her name is Jean. I will link the podcast in the description, but she's had 26 years of homeschooling experience, and she does an amazing and wonderful and such important work on tackling so many different topics about homeschooling as an aid to the parents. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight that brings me to relationships with the family is that when you spend so many hours together at home, it's inevitable that a lot of your emotions are kind of contained in one place. So they're not dispersed throughout the classroom, throughout the people, the teachers, throughout the day, but it's really one-on-one. And she talks about the fact that a homeschooling parent becomes an emotional container for everyone in the family's emotions. And it leads to outbursts or frictions, and there's higher levels of conflict. And the homeschooling parent really needs to have a very strict self-care routine in place, and to know how to manage everybody in the family, all the different personalities and their own emotions. And it can get pretty tough from that perspective, just because we all have a general social battery, and then within that social battery we have a battery for every different person. Let's say with your best friend you have a really big battery, and then with somebody who you don't really know that well and it's kind of boring, you have a very small battery. But at some point when you spend tons of time even with a dear friend, you need a break. Like, you can't look at their face at some point. So it's a similar concept, but what are you gonna do when the home life and the academic life stops being differentiated? So that was also a bit difficult, but on the other hand, it really deepens the connection you have with your family. You become closer. It develops a certain sense of pack mentality, of loyalty, and I mean, as always, as I keep saying, there is pros and cons to every aspect. The daily flexibility allowed me to have more time to follow my natural curiosity, to go down the rabbit hole, to have more introspection, to keep questioning things. And then when learning becomes an adventure, it really takes on a whole different character. I felt excited, I felt challenged, like I was on a quest. It was really, truly an adventure to learn a new word, to connect the dots, to answer a question about a random historical fact, or to solve a certain mathematical problem. There was a lot of self-validation that came purely from my own incentive, because I was just faced with this task and there was no constraints and nobody telling me this has to be done at a certain time or you have to do it just because. You do it because you want to learn. It really does instill a sense of deep love for learning and knowledge in you. There's also an element of self-sufficiency, because when you pursue knowledge based on your natural instinct, something in your soul alights and rises to this quest. And it's almost like suddenly and without warning, a part of you opens up and gets built out in strengths. A lot like a gust of wind, just something really strong and refreshing, opening up your mind's doors to new possibilities because you want the answer, and so you make yourself rise to that challenge. Conclusion. Whenever I used to think back over my homeschooling experience, just like the Picasso blue period, it was tinged with sadness. Sadness over feeling that I didn't have the typical wonderful, fun high school experience that's glorified, remembering the long periods of loneliness and isolation that I've had, and also feeling like I've lost a big part of my social skills. When I was in primary school, I was an outgoing kid. By the time I entered high school, I was rather introspective and very introverted and quite detached from what was going on within my peer groups. But in researching a little bit more about homeschooling and putting together the notes about my experience and some of the pros and cons, I stand corrected in my opinion. I've spoken of the good that I've acquired, and those were definitely gifts. But now, thinking back, the challenges were also gifts because they made me who I am. And I'm grateful to have had this experience putting this video together to revisit now those memories with the breadth of an adult gaze. And I'm also grateful to whoever is watching this video, because I made it for you to learn something new about homeschooling, but in retrospect, I learned something very valuable myself as well. Perhaps us meeting here at this point in time and through this video is just a connection of people who are knowledge seekers. And if that's the case, maybe you can consider subscribing to my channel so we can continue this knowledge-seeking journey together. Once again, thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll catch you in my next video.